What is going on, you guys? This is DerekJ Speaks, and we are here to talk about AEW Redemption live from the Bell Center in Montreal, Quebec, Canada. And this was indeed a show. It was a show that took place on pay per view. Not anywhere close to one of their better pay per views, unfortunately. This was a show that was announced very late in the game, not too long ago, and all signs pointed towards a much different pay-per-view main event, but they decided to do that on free television a few weeks ago at Beach Break when Kenny Omega already got his redemption by beating MJF on that show to win back the AEW World Championship. Therefore, on this show, the task was to try to create a different story. At least that's what I assumed the whole redemption name was about, but clearly I was wrong. I guess it was just about a name and nothing more than that, because instead, the main event of this show was Kenny Omega defending that championship. Canada's own Kenny Omega defending that championship in the main event against Kevin Knight, the current TNT champion, recent new member of the Don Callis family, just turned heel a few months ago, and is clearly a project of Tony Khan in terms of he sees this guy as being one of his future big stars. And so to put him in a pay-per-view main event like this, good spot for him. He and Omega went out there and had a damn good match. Now, did that main event really do a whole lot to inspire a lot of interest in this show? I don't think so. Was the finish ever in doubt? Absolutely not. Not when they already slapped a graphic for Kenny Omega versus Will Ospreay at All In next month. So you already knew going in how this was going to finish. But for his part, Kevin Knight just had to show up and prove that he could hang with someone at Kenny's level. And he did just that. And the two of them proceeded to have a really good match, a very long match, which was a recurring issue on this show for damn near every single match. But this one, I mean, it's the main event, so you can understand it. And Kevin, I should say, he shined, and he took some crazy bumps in this match too, at the hands of Kenny Omega. But like I said, the finish was never in doubt. Kenny won, hit the one-winged angel, and he got the win. The big story of the show, the big cliffhanger ending that they wanted to have everyone really think about coming out of this show was what happened in the post-match. Now, to kind of understand this, you got to go back to earlier in the show where we had a tag team match with Jon Moxley and Will Ospreay taking on the Young Bucks. Over the course of that match, at one point, Ospreay and Nick Jackson bonked heads, and Nick was kind of selling his head like he was a little woozy throughout the rest of the match. And this caused Matt to fight by himself for some of the match, but more importantly, this really took Will Ospreay aback and caused him to hesitate a lot of the times. When it was times to rain down blows on Nick's head, he couldn't bring himself to do it. He kind of did it at certain points, but when it was really time to kind of pull the trigger, he didn't do it. And so Mox, he got fed up and he decided to go ahead and pull the trigger himself, to the point where he went out and grabbed a steel chair, risked disqualification, I might add, but even still, he went out, got himself a steel chair, was about to use it, and Will Ospreay intervened and swiped the chair away from him and told him this is not the right thing to do. And of course, for his troubles, he got super kicked right in the face with the chair, got taken out. Moxley all alone, his partner wiped out. He gets rained down upon with a shower of super kicks, multiple super kicks from both Bucks, until Nick pinned him and the Bucks got the win. So it was a really good match, and they told a very good story of Will Ospreay's resistance and his inability to pull that trigger. Even though he's been training with the Death Riders, he's been rolling with them for the past several months, He was able to do it with Swerve in the finals of the Owen Hart Cup tournament, but here against someone like Nick, who he pointed out later in an interview on the show, who has had a history of head injuries and all that kind of stuff, he couldn't pull himself to do it. Meanwhile, Moxley, his whole thing for the past couple of weeks on television, especially ever since Omega won the championship, and maybe even a little before that, is that people don't change. And he's always resented the Bucks. He has this long-standing beef with Kenny Omega, and his whole point is that, to Will, is when the time comes, you can't hesitate, you have to pull the trigger. And then later on in the show, during the interview, he was saying the same thing to Will, but he told him that if he doesn't do it, then he, that being Moxley, he will. And so, at the end of the main event, out comes the Death Riders to attack Kenny Omega. They beat him down. The Bucks try to run out for the save. They get beaten down too. And once it looks like they're going to Pillmanize him, out comes Will Ospreay to make the save. It looks like they're going to have Cesaro stomp on the chair that's wrapped around Omega's neck, but Ospreay pushes them all away, makes them clear the ring, and then Moxley gets in the ring, and he and Ospreay go face to face, and Moxley pulls out a plastic bag, the same kind of plastic bag that we have seen the Death Riders use on many baby faces in the past, and Mox was encouraging Will Ospreay to use it on Kenny. And it looked like he was going for it. The fans, of course, are chanting no. They're hoping that he doesn't do it. Of course, this is their countryman, so of course they don't want to see him do it, but they're telling him no and don't do it and all that. And so Ospreay takes the bag, rips it up, gets a big pop for it. He gets a nice forearm shot to Moxley, takes him out of the ring, clears out the rest of the Death Riders, hits a hidden blade on Pac, sends them running. And they go through the crowd. Ospreay, he takes off that Death Riders patch that was on his jacket. He tosses it aside. Moxley's yelling at him, but the Death Riders are gone. And so now left in the ring, it's just it's just Ospreay and Omega. And he helps up Omega, Omega gets up on his own, holding the ripped up plastic bag, and Ospreay has the championship belt. He presents it to Omega, they shake hands, they go to each side of the ring and pose on their respective individual corners. And once Ospreay's up on one corner, Omega comes over, lifts him up on his shoulders, and plants him with a one-winged angel. And the Bucks are confused by this. Omega, it doesn't seem phased at all. He's holding the bag up to Ospreay's face as he's laid out there. And that's how the show went off the air, with Omega posing with the Bucks, and they walk off together. Now, the big question is, was this a Kenny Omega heel turn? I don't think so. Could it be over the next month of television that he might be more in the heel side? Not necessarily. Or I should say it could happen. I don't think that's what was happening here. The way I interpreted this ending here is that Kenny Omega basically proved that Jon Moxley was right. Like I said, past couple of weeks, Mox has been very vague, but he has been telling Will Ospreay that people don't change, and you got to pull the trigger, and you got to, don't hesitate and all that kind of stuff. On this show, Ospreay hesitated. He didn't take out Nick Jackson when it was the time to. He didn't take out Kenny Omega here, and he outright rejected Jon Moxley and the Death Riders in some self-righteous attempt to stand on his belief and do things the right way, and did not want to jeopardize the health and integrity of whatever relationship he has with Kenny Omega and all that stuff. So that's Will Ospreay's stance. And for taking that stance and defending Omega and rejecting the way of the Death Riders and Jon Moxley, he got planted by Kenny Omega, because Kenny Omega did not hesitate, and he knows what's ahead, and he planted him. So now we have to wait to see what Will Ospreay's reaction is going to be. He not only has to confront Kenny, and now does have to put him down, but he might also have to go back to the Death Riders with his tail between his legs and basically admit to Moxley that he was right all along about Kenny, and he was right all along to not hesitate and all that. And maybe either the Death Riders turn him away or they bring him back in, maybe a little more rough with him to really get the message across. And Ospreay now has to dig down deep to put down Kenny Omega. At least that's how I interpret the story. It's their job to come out on television over the next month or so and tell this story, or tell a version of said story that is interesting and that can get people excited for Will Ospreay versus Kenny Omega outside of just the match alone, because it needs a little more heat on it than that. I take it that tonight on this show, they took one step forward in trying to heat up this match a little bit. And again, I don't think they turned Kenny heel, because then the idea is like, well, if they wanted a heel in there with Will Ospreay, why didn't they just keep MJF? First of all, I mean, that's justified. MJF, Will Ospreay was right there. Would have been a big match to do. They've done it before at Wembley, and it worked there. It would have worked better here too. But the way I see it is Tony Khan views Will Ospreay versus Kenny Omega as the bigger match to do on this show. Both matches have been done in the past, but I think in terms of wanting to sell out the show this year, Tony Khan looked at things and he felt that the bigger match to do on this particular show was Kenny Omega versus Will Ospreay. And so far, that match being announced has moved quite a few tickets. They're still far below where they were several years ago with that first Wembley show. They're not reaching those numbers ever again, so long as they keep going back to Wembley every single year, or most years at least. But that's how I view that. So I don't view this as being Kenny turning heel. I just think this is two baby faces, the two of the biggest baby faces in the entire company, colliding, and the heat is on now. It's a matter of who's gonna put down who first, who's gonna be able to pull that trigger, who's gonna, you got to put that brother or bruv stuff to the side, and it's two men fighting it out for the biggest prize in the company. And that's what it has to come down to. At least I hope that's what it has to come down to, because I don't need to see Kenny go back to being a chicken shit heel and running away from Will Ospreay, and now Ospreay's the valiant babyface. I don't want, we've seen that before. I don't need that to be this match, because I would agree, if you were just gonna have Ospreay go in there and take the belt from a chicken shit heel, then yes, you should have just kept it on MJF. So hopefully that's not how they take this story. And the Death Rider stuff, I can take it or leave it. I see what they're doing. Obviously, at some point, we are going to get Will Ospreay versus Jon Moxley. I imagine that'll be the all-out match. After Ospreay wins the championship, it'll be him versus Mox on that show. At least that's how I view things. But I thought the way this angle went down and how it closed the show was a pretty strong way to end the show. I liked the storytelling, just like I liked the storytelling in that tag match with the Bucks and Mox and Ospreay. I thought that was fine. And those were two solid things on this show that had some solid things all throughout, but top to bottom, up and down, like I said, this was one of the weaker AEW pay-per-views. Unlike the previous pay-per-view, which I did not review, that was Forbidden Door, it was one of those rare shows where the show didn't go off until 1 a.m. And so Tony Khan got some pushback. I mean, he's always gotten feedback and criticism for how long these shows go on for. But I imagine this time it was some of the more hardcore fans that really got in his ear, because I feel like that's the only way Tony ever really makes changes, is if his hardcore fan base, like the real sickos that he caters to so much, they're the ones who kind of speak up a little bit more. Because people like me and other podcasters and reviewers, he don't listen to them. He doesn't care what any of us have to say. All the times that we complain about these shows being too long or complain about this and that, he doesn't care what we have to say. He only cares about the people who are ride or die, bleed AEW. So when they speak up, that's when the change is made. And I imagine that's what took place, because for this show, he bumped the start time up an hour to 7 p.m. Cool. And yet the show still went off the air, not right at midnight, but pretty close to it, like 10 or 15 till. And that's a lot of other previous pay-per-views have also gone off the air at that exact same time. So it's pretty maddening that he pushes the show up an hour and yet it still ends around, give or take, the same time that it usually does. As egregious as the 1 a.m. end times are, those are rare. He doesn't always do that. But I hate that the justification here is like, well, we didn't go off the air at 1 a.m., so you have to be happy about that, but you still went off the air at 12 a.m. or close to it. And the problem isn't even as much of the length of the show. The problem isn't that the show has so many matches. A 10-match card, that can be done in 3 or 4 hours. The issue is that on a 10-match card, 8, and this is probably generous, 8 of those 10 matches all go 20 plus minutes. I find that to be ridiculous. That is completely unnecessary. Why must every single match on this show go so long? And I hate to pick on them, but Kyle Fletcher, he had an international championship match on this show against Bandito. A match that many people, myself included, already figured Kyle Fletcher was going to win. And, spoiler alert, he did. They had a really good match. A lot of great, fun, exciting moves. Way too many kickouts, which is another issue, but I don't have time to tackle that issue at the same time we're talking about this one. But this match took place like the third match of the night, and they go 25 plus minutes. Now, I've seen some people point out, like, well, it's fine. You want the international championship to be viewed with some level of importance and prestige. I get that. That kind of goes out the window when there's 8 other mid-card championship belts, but sure, let's play that up for a little bit. You can still showcase how prestigious the championship is and how valuable the championship is, and still showcase how incredible these two athletes are in under 25 minutes. You easily could have shaved 10 minutes off of this match. And I know you could have, because the last 10 or so minutes were filled with both men hitting each other with these random big moves and kicking out, or hitting their finishers, hitting the 21 plex, or hitting brain busters and all these crazy moves on one another, and both men kicking out of it. You didn't need that. I'm sorry. Like, as good as this match was, and it was fun, it was probably one of the better matches of the night. If you are someone who said this was the best match of the night, I can't even argue with you. It was a really good one, but it didn't need to go as long as it was. And I only stress that point because it adds to the length of the show. The show goes on as long as it does because you have matches like that in the undercard within the first hour or hour and a half of the show, going so long. And then it's followed up by other matches that equally go just as long. When you look back on this show, which some would argue this show itself didn't need to exist, but you look at a match like Kyle Fletcher and Bandito, you could have shaved off 10 minutes, 10 or 15, maybe not 15, but like 10, 12 minutes off the match, still would have been just as good. These guys are talented enough where I truly believe that they can have a great match in under 15 minutes. Like, it doesn't need to go as long. 12, 15 minutes, kick-ass match. Kyle Fletcher wins. We all know it's going to happen. Like, it can be done. I know it can be done. Tony Khan has to trust his wrestlers, and these wrestlers have to trust themselves that they don't need to all go out there and have these long, big, epic showdowns, and every single match needs to come off like this big, back and forth, brutal war. You can save that for the main event matches. You can save that for just the main event sometimes. Especially when it warrants it. I would argue also that just because it's the last match of the night does not mean it needs to go 25, 30 minutes either. You can still have a great main event on your show that goes 20 minutes. Hell, even 15 minutes. If there's enough variety on the rest of the show, whatever helps the show pacing wise, you can do it. It can be done. But then you have a match like that goes on too long. You have a match like the one with the Dogs and the Bang Bang Gang, with Juice Robinson and Jay White taking on David Finlay and Clark Connors in a double chain match. This match just flat out didn't need to take place on the show at all. This was the low point of the show. The show kicked off with a really fun ladder match that Speedball Mike Bailey won. It went into the tag match with the Bucks, and then it went right into Fletcher and Bandito. Again, you can shave time off of those matches, but those are some really fun matches to start your show with. And it immediately goes into this chain match, and the crowd just dies for it. These guys, God bless them, they're out there, they're beating each other with these chains, choking each other out, trying to have a really good fight, and these fans are just not into any of it. Jay White, he came back at the last show, and he's here. I'm happy to have him back, but man, this stuff with the Dogs just has not been hitting at all. And honestly, it's because of the Dogs, because the way that they have been introduced and presented on the show has not been done well in my eyes. If you like David Finlay and Clark Connors, it's not because of the way that they've been introduced to AEW. I can assure you of that. If you say otherwise, I think you're lying. It has to be because you know their history with the Bullet Club and that whole stuff with Gabe Kidd in New Japan. That is not how they have been presented ever since they arrived in AEW. In fact, they have lost way more than they've won in AEW. That wasn't the case tonight. They did win their match with help from the Death Riders and Marina Shafir passing a shillelagh to David Finlay, who clobbered Juice Robinson in the head with it and got the win. But so they won here, and I imagine this will set up either a big 10-man tag at All In with everybody and the Dogs and the Death Riders and the Bang Bang Gang. Just strip it down to its parts and just do David Finlay versus Jay White. That's the story there. That's the heart of this. Just do that match. Hopefully that's the route they go. If not, I mean, oh well. So there was that. You had your typical, obligatory, almost hardcore match, but a no-holds-barred match between Tommaso Ciampa and the Painmaker. Not even Painmaker Chris Jericho. It's now this Painmaker stuff that he does where he just paints his face and competes in a hardcore match. Instead of it just being him, just dressed up weird, it's now turned into a completely different personality. Like he's the Fiend or something like that. When he came out, he had his own music, and they only referred to him as the Painmaker. Again, it's like the Fiend or the Demon Finn Balor or something like that, where he transforms into this entirely, completely separate character. And the two men, again, they went out there and busted their asses, and they had a brutal fight. All the weapons were there, the chairs, and I guess there wasn't that many tables used. They used the announce table, I think. But, well, no, there was a table, because at one point, I think Ciampa planted Jericho through a table. So there was tables. There was trash cans and fire extinguishers. We had barbed wire. We had a barbed wire table. There you go. That was something else that was used because Jericho put him through a barbed wire table as well. We had thumbtacks. We had hockey. We had hockey references here. We had a hockey puck and, hockey jerseys. I'm not familiar with any of these teams, so that didn't really land with me. We had hockey pucks that had thumbtacks attached to them, so there was a lot of stuff here. And of course, it came down to a power drill because that was introduced by Ciampa in their first match back at Beach Break a couple of weeks ago. So Jericho, or the Painmaker, used that power drill to drill into Ciampa's head, and the referee, Aubrey Edwards, she just called for the bell. I guess that technically counts as a submission or something, and that was the end of the match, and Jericho won. So I imagine this is the end of the feud. Both men can move on from here. Like I said, it was a fine match, but these hardcore matches in AEW, on these pay-per-views, on free television, It's the same weapons, it's similar spots, or at least they're just doing spots to get people to react. We had a mirror or several mirrors used in this match, so that meant we got glass used. Crimea River. It's just, if I never see another hardcore match in this company, it'll be a day too. It won't be a day too soon. You know, I could go a year without ever seeing another hardcore match in this company, and it would still be not enough time. But they're gonna do what they're gonna do. This is what this company does, and it has its audience. The fans were into it. They were chanting stuff, and they got into it. By this point in the night, this was one of the matches that they woke back up for, because there was a good stretch of a few matches there in the middle of the show where they weren't really reacting much to what they were seeing. But except for like the occasional wake up where, oh, we like that, and then they kind of just died right back down. So there was that. I mentioned the Bucks winning their tag team match. That led into another tag team match in the show where Cope and Christian retained their titles against who else? The Death Riders. The only heels in this company are Death Riders sometimes and Don Callis family members, and that's really it. If you're not in any of those groups, then chances are you're not really around all that much. But we had Cope and Christian against Claudio Castagnoli and Pac for the AEW tag team titles. This was a match. It was pretty good. Cope and Christian, I mean, they're not the most exciting team to watch in 2026, but they do know how to still put on some pretty good matches filled with a lot of drama, and that worked here. Again, the finish was never in doubt. It's Pac and Claudio. There was no way that they were going to win these titles, especially not this close to All In, and that happened. So Cope, I think he hit the final spear on Pac to get the win here. Again, it was a fine match. Nothing, not far above or below anything you would see on TV any random week. But the big story here was what happened after the match, when the Young Bucks came out and applauding both Cope and Christian. And then as all four men stood in the ring face to face, they slapped the graphic up on the Tron that showed that the match has been made official, with the Bucks against Cope and Christian for the tag titles at All In. I think we have all known for months this was where it was leading. I don't mind that they did it this way. We all knew this was going to be the match. There was never any doubt that this was going to be the match. And the Bucks have been racking up all these wins leading up to this moment. So they've been openly talking about how we want to go after the tag team titles and want to build ourselves back up to go after those belts. They did it. They won on this show, a pretty big match over two big stars. So it made sense to just go ahead and announce it on this show. I have no issues with that. Question is, will other teams eventually be added to it? They have a show in Detroit this week, and a certain tag team who was released by the other company 90 days ago, their non-competes are up, and they might be debuting on the show this week. So is that possible? And if so, could they be added to this equation? There's another team out there that recently left the company a few months ago. Could they rear their heads in here? I don't know. I feel like this match is set. I feel like the matches that they announced on this show for All In are going to be the matches that take place at All In. So, Kenny and Ospreay and here, like, these are matches that are locked in. So what they do with these other teams coming in, I don't know. At least they're all teams for the Young Bucks to work with coming out of All In. And Cope and Christian, I don't know what you do with them. They can also work with them, but it's time for them to lose the belts, you know. It was fun. It was a great moment when they won it against FTR back at Revolution, or Double or Nothing, I should say. But it's time to move on. Or was it Dynasty? I don't know. I don't remember when they won. I think it was, I'm pretty sure it was Double or Nothing. That's where they won. But we can move on now. And we can move on from here because we had two women's matches on this show, and both were for women's championships, and both titles changed hands. We had the TBS championship on the line with Hikaru Shida defending the TBS championship against Maya World. This was one of those matches on the show where the crowd just wasn't into it. I'm pretty sure it came after the dogs match, so they really weren't into it. But they had a pretty good match. I don't remember if this one went too long like some of the others, but it was pretty good. And Maya World shocked the hell out of me by pulling off the upset win and becoming the new TBS champion. She's still riding high off that momentum from that Owen Hart finals match with Mercedes at Forbidden Door the previous month. So they've kept her somewhat, relevant on the shows, mainly Collision more than anything, but she's been a presence. And now here on this night, on her birthday nonetheless, she beats Sheeta, who only just won the championship earlier in the month, and she beat her, and now she's the new TBS champion. So good for her. I'm happy to see it for her, and hopefully Tony Khan continues to push her. People like her and Kevin Knight getting big pushes in this company. I like to see it. So hopefully that continues. And it wasn't the only big women's championship to change hands on this show. We have a brand new women's world champion, as Willow Nightingale returned several weeks ago to win a casino gauntlet match and earn a shot at Tekla on this show. And she won. She beat Tekla, got a baseball slide, and got the win. They had a really good match. It really was unpredictable. I had a feeling that Willow was going to win, but I also thought maybe Tony Khan looks at Tekla versus Mercedes for All In as a big match to do. Never been seen, but they've kept Mercedes as a heel. And so doing heel versus heel at the biggest show of the year for the championship, it just didn't seem like it was realistic. Of course, they could just let them be what they're going to be and let the fans, cheer who they want to cheer. But you have two very unlikable characters, so you run the risk of neither one of them really getting cheered all that much. So it made sense for them to go with Willow to be the babyface and finish off what has turned into now a trilogy in AEW. It was many years ago that Mercedes, her first official match in the company, was her beating Willow for the TBS championship. Last year, at the end of the year in December, Willow won that championship back and ended Mercedes' forever run with that title. And now we run it back here with both women competing for the world championship at the biggest show of the year. Willow defending against Mercedes, who up to this point, every single time she has challenged for the world championship, she has failed. So we'll see if she can finally pull off the win here. I think there's a good chance we're only going to get a 1-month title reign for Miss Willow, which is unfortunate. This is her first time winning the world championship. She's only going to hold it for a month, lose it to Mercedes, but I think the time is here. After she already lost last year. She won the Owen last year, Mercedes did, and then lost the championship match against Toni Storm. To come back a year later, she two-peats and wins the Owen again, only for her to go to the big show and lose again. I feel like that's a waste of the story there. So I predict we're going to get a Mercedes win, and poor Willow is going to only hold the championship for a month, and poor Tekla doesn't even make it to All In with the championship. A lot of Tekla fans, I consider myself a Tekla fan too, and it would have been nice to see her get in that spot. I don't think they're going to add her, so I don't know what they're going to do with her on that show, but it won't be in the World Championship match. Also on this show, another championship changed hands. Andrade El Idolo. He beat Mark Davis. I forgot his name for a second there, which is a shame because I like Mark Davis. Mark Davis is a really good wrestler. He's a nice brawler. He feels very old school when he's out there. I really didn't think much of him when they broke up United Empire and all the attention was on Kyle Fletcher and what kind of future that he has. I wasn't really even looking at Mark Davis, but he has turned the corner with me, and he's put on some really good banger matches on TV over the past several months, and I liked the fact that he was able to hold championship gold, but put him up against Andrade, who is having one of the better years for himself. I mean, the writing was on the wall here. So Andrade hit the DM and got the win, and he is the new national champion. I forgot to mention which championship it was because there's so many damn belts in this company. But yes, he is the new national champion. So good for him. And I don't really know what is next for him, but good stuff nonetheless. You know, Hangman did beat Andrade in a match earlier in the year, and Hangman currently cannot challenge for world championships. He did just return to TV not too long ago, although it happened on Collision, and then the very next week on Dynamite, they didn't make a single mention of it. There wasn't a mention of him on this show either. So, you would never know. But maybe they run that match for All In. I don't know. We'll see. I mentioned earlier how we're getting an international championship match. Well, we had it on the show with Kyle Fletcher. We also on this show had a ladder match to determine a number one contender for the international championship. We had a bunch of guys in there. We had Jack Perry in there, Beast Mortos, El Clone, Nick Wayne. I think Commander was in there. Yes, Commander was in there. And of course, the winner was the hometown favorite, Speedball Mike Bailey. This was much like the No Holds Barred match. You know, like if you've seen one multi-man ladder match, you've seen a lot of them. Still has some crazy stuff in here with Speedball hitting a big moonsault off a tall ladder. We had Nick Wayne having one of the best spots of the night, hitting a Phoenix Splash, crashing down through a table on somebody. I forget who he hit it on. But regardless, it was impressive. But Speedball got the win here, and they have set that match up. Speedball versus Kyle Fletcher for the International Championship coming up on August 5th at the Arena Mexico show, Grand Slam Mexico. They're doing that for the second year in a row now. And the previous two matches that Kyle Fletcher and Speedball have had have all been really good, so I imagine this one will also be good. I don't think Speedball's winning because I imagine that Kyle Fletcher will be defending that championship either against Konosuke Takeshita in a rematch or in a triple threat match that includes Takeshita and Kazuchika Okada, because they have teased a little bit of dissension between Fletcher and Okada on TV. So I imagine that we'll see some variation of that match at All In, and I believe that takes care of this show. So that's everything that took place. Again, it was a fine show. If I had to give it a grade, B minus, C plus, in that range, 6.5 out of 10 kind of thing. I look at this show and there was some really good matches and they forwarded a lot of stories heading into All In, but coming out of it, man, if you ask me, I don't really think they did enough to justify this show's existence. And good for Tony Khan starting the show earlier, but you still have the issue of the show feeling too long because you have so many matches on the show that go too long. The matches that take place in the beginning of the show should not all go as long as they did. They should not have so many matches early in the show where you have guys kicking out of all these big moves and finishers and all this stuff. You have to cut that back a little bit. But again, preaching to the choir, if you're listening to this, there's a good chance you feel the same way as I do, but there's that really hardcore contingent of fans who really support AEW and everything they do, no criticism, and they just love everything and are never upset or criticize anything. And anytime there's any criticism, they just think it's wrong and you're a hater and all that kind of stuff. And they love this stuff. They love being overflowed with just wrestling matches. All the matches in the world, they can all go as long as they want to. They're all bangers, all this stuff. That's the mindset. Hell, that's Tony Khan's mindset. I get it, but they should really do a better job of tightening up things for these shows because it just makes it very difficult as a viewer. As bad as it is watching WWE PLEs, and believe me, it's bad watching these shows have 5-8 minute matches, and then between each match there's 8 to 10 minutes worth of commercials and video packages and celebrity shots in the crowd and all that other garbage that they do. But as bad as that is, what these shows do of match after match after match going 15, 20, 25, 35, 45 minutes, it feels like, has to be a happy medium somewhere in the middle there. You have to meet in the middle somewhere for these shows to be a little more digestible. Now, sometimes it works, sometimes it flows well, other times it feels like it's a slog and a marathon to get to or get through, especially when it's on a show that wasn't all that well built up and has 80% of the card with matches that really have no compelling story behind it. I'm not going to say there's no story, it's just they're not compelling stories. But now all roads point to All In, which we already know, with it starting earlier in the day since it's in London. And that's gonna be a long one too. So this is the wrong time to complain about it because that next big show is gonna be quite long in its own right. So just gear up and be ready for it. And especially, with a lot of these big matches that have been announced and are being teased, they're all gonna go super long. So we'll see. And speaking of going long, I need to go ahead and end it here. Thanks for listening. Hope you enjoyed my ranting and rambling about this show. And give your thoughts. Share your thoughts. Tweet me at DerekJ Speaks or comment down below what you thought about this show. Till next time, before we get to the next AEW show with All In at the end of next month, we have SummerSlam, nights 1 and 2 coming up. I was going to say next week. It's this upcoming week. It's this weekend, in fact. So, we'll gear up for that. So until next time, check you later.